The man who made Family Feud a worldwide sensation and established The Steve Harvey Show as a timeless icon of American television is Steve Harvey, the unending king of comedy. He went from being a homeless man lost in the dark and cooped up in a wrecked car for 3 long years, to becoming a living legend who dominated the stage and became the most influential voice in the hearts of millions. He established a massive empire deserving of the moniker, the unshakable giant of television, thanks to his explosive charisma and razor-sharp humor. In addition to providing entertainment for decades, Steve Harvey has changed the face of entertainment around the world and inspired countless everyday lives by redefining what it means to persevere. Steve Harvey, the man behind Family Feud, the kings of comedy, and best-selling books that have inspired, mentored, and transformed the lives of millions worldwide, will always be remembered as a cultural icon. But beneath that dazzling legacy is a grim and glitzy tale, a battlefield of wounds that never fully healed, broken families, heartbreaking loneliness, and tragedies from which not even the greatest celebrity could shield him. For many years, the world only saw his smile, but few ever experienced the eerie truth that weighed heavily on his heart, the sinister secrets and the deep wounds that would never heal. Join us as we navigate a life full of victories but also tainted by adversity and loss. And before we start, don't forget to hit like in honor of the man who brought joy to the world while bearing unfathomable pain alone. If you think Steve Harvey is one of the most influential legends in television history, when a legend begins with a tearing sound that is louder than any laughter, the sound of a dream being ripped apart in front of jeering eyes rather than with applause, it is heartbreaking. At home, the youngest of 5 children, who carried a stutter and a brittle hope, never found any solace despite the cold dust sticking to his father's boots and the chalk stains on his mother's hands. Steve Harvey's childhood was etched with the scars of deprivation and shame rather than happiness. Steve was born on January 17, 1957, in the tiny coal town of Welch, West Virginia. His parents were Eloise Vera, a teacher who pushed every dollar until it broke, and Jesse Harvey, a miner whose lungs were blackened by working endless shifts underground. Later, the family relocated to Cleveland, Ohio, where they settled on East 112th Street. The neighborhood was rough. There were few opportunities, and every dream seemed to be crushed by the weight of poverty. In honor of the boy who once walked the street's cracked sidewalks with holes in his shoes, the street would be renamed Steve Harvey Way decades later. Poverty had no mercy. Winter nights were colder than the walls could protect. Clothing was patched until it fell apart, and food was scarce because there were 4 siblings to share everything. And the color of his skin was a layer on top of poverty. It was uncommon for a young black boy in the Midwest in the 1960s to be inspired to dream bigger than survival. Every goal Steve had was doubly precarious because he was ridiculed not only for his lack of wealth and stutter, but also because of the time and place that condemned him before he had even started. His stammer made every word a battleground in the classroom. Laughter came from broken syllables and scorn was painful. But when the teacher asked the students to write about their future one afternoon in elementary school, it left him with a wound that would never go away. Steve, a young child with big dreams, scribbled clumsily, "I want to be on television." The room froze, then burst into vile laughter. More than a dream was destroyed when the teacher's hand tore his paper in 2. On TV, a poor stuttering black boy from Cleveland? It's impossible, she sneered, even phoning his parents to berate him for his conceit. "I still hear that paper tearing," Steve would later confess. "Words could never express how deeply it affected me." Shame was visible on his mother's face, but his father Jesse firmly said, "Write it down again," while looking into his son's eyes. "Hang it on your wall. Every morning and evening, read it. Make a commitment." Scripture was born out of those words. From that day forward, Harvey recited his dream like a prayer, clutching that scrap of paper as if it were his only lifeline. The vow was still blazing in his chest when he graduated from Glenville High School in 1974. And Steve Harvey never forgot when the unthinkable happened years later. He sent a note with a new television every Christmas, reminding his old teacher that the boy she made fun of was now in every American living room. The wounds from childhood never went away. Instead, they became stronger and more resilient, creating the voice, the fire, and the unwavering determination that would eventually turn Steve Harvey into more than just a celebrity. The contrast between a boy's torn paper dream and the thunderous cheers of a comedy stage is unsettling. Once a frail child who stammered in a Cleveland classroom, he developed into a restless young man who stumbled through a tangle of occupations that never satisfied his soul. Under icy conditions, he delivered mail from door to door until his fingers went numb. He worked as a mechanic turning wrenches, selling insurance policies to strangers who slammed doors in his face, cleaning carpets until his knuckles bled, and even getting paid to take punches in a boxing ring. His pockets were almost empty at the end of each shift, and his spirit was even more depleted. The assurance he once wrote for his father, "I will be on TV," lingered in his thoughts like a brittle lantern in a never-ending night tunnel. Then, one night in 1985, the crowd waited for someone, anyone, to make them laugh in a smoky club in Cleveland with dim lighting. Steve was challenged by a friend to perform at an open mic. His heart thumping his ribs, he took a step forward with nothing left to lose. The room burst into laughter as the first joke stammered out, followed by another. Like freedom and fire, the sound encircled him. Steve was crying as he walked out into the chilly night after the host gave him $50. Through sobs, he whispered, "I was born tonight," clutching the crumpled bill as though it were treasure. He quit his job the following morning. He realized for the first time who he was supposed to be. However, a straight path is rarely provided by fate. Following that discovery, Steve Harvey spent 3 arduous years living in the backseat of a 1976 Ford, rather than in hotels or apartments. The car became his kitchen, his roof, and his hope-filled coffin. His refrigerator was a cooler in the trunk. His restrooms were public pool showers and sinks at gas stations. The nights were cruel. His stomach growled louder than his jokes as hunger tore at it. Days were filled with cheap sandwiches, and occasionally the only way he could get away from the pain of an empty stomach was to go to sleep. Fearful that someone might see through the glass and learn about his secret life, he would sit in the driver's seat with fog accumulating on the cracked windshield and watch streetlights flicker on faces that passed him. He would later admit, "It was so depressing. You can do it for a week, but 3 years?" Even so, he clung to his father's instruction to read his dreams every morning and night while muttering them in the car's quiet like a sacred text. He maintained that he had faith that things would improve, even during his darkest moments. It nearly reached the breaking point. One evening, prepared to give up, he picked up the phone to call his father and confess his defeat. But he hit play on his answering machine before he dialed. 2 messages blinked. The first is a $150 deal from a Jacksonville club. The second, another gig for the same price the very next evening. He had $300 all of a sudden, which was barely enough to pay for a cheap flight to New York, where he was to perform for the Showtime at the Apollo producers. The story of Steve Harvey might have ended in silence if he had missed those calls. One button, one hesitation. Only unanticipated angels allowed for survival even back then. His perseverance was acknowledged by a generous couple, Rich and Becky Liss, who offered him a carpet cleaning contract and a travel credit line. Shame almost buried his dignity, but their faith restored it. Years later, Steve called them live on national television to express his gratitude while crying and promising to return their kindness for the rest of his life. He was not broken by those years of starvation, mockery, and chilly car rides. He was carved. Every failure served as fuel. Every setback served as a springboard, until the boy who had been made fun of for stuttering was prepared to address the country. Having been baptized in adversity and born again in laughter, Steve Harvey now possessed the unwavering fire of a man destined to become a legend. Now standing beneath the dazzling lights of Harlem was the boy who had once whispered his dream in the dark of a Ford. Steve Harvey was announced as a finalist in the Johnny Walker National Comedy Search in 1990. It was the same voice that had stuttered and cracked in a Cleveland classroom, but now it came out sharp and smooth, piercing doubt and bursting into thunderous applause. That night was more than just a competition. It was evidence that the boy who had been made fun of for having too big of a dream had finally made the world pay attention, and shortly after he entered the storied stage of Showtime at the Apollo, carrying a burden much greater than a microphone. Not only was he a comedian behind those curtains, but he was also a survivor of starvation, mockery, and cold nights spent in a car that felt more like a coffin than a house. Every chuckle from that Harlem crowd was more than just a joke. It was a shield against shame, a piece of armor against poverty, and the very sound of salvation. Steve Harvey carried Apollo on his shoulders for 7 years, turning the stage into a battleground where his wounds served as his fortitude. Gas station lights were replaced by Harlem lights. The silence of his most lonely nights was drowned out by the cheers of thousands. However, the cost was high, writing jokes until dawn, touring and hosting. Under 18-hour days, his body stumbled. He frequently spoke in a frayed tone. His mind was on the verge of collapsing and his back hurt from the restless flights. "The laugh you hear is the wound I turned inside out," he once acknowledged. He had to bleed a little more of himself with each performance, transforming humiliation into hope and pain into jokes. And the same teacher who had torn his paper now had to see him every week, in every home, on every screen as television cameras spread his face across the country. The glory increased along with the climb's steepness. He starred in Me and the Boys in 1994. 2 years later, The Steve Harvey Show, which ran until 2002, became a cultural icon. He was more than just a comedian to millions. He was a living example of how hopelessness can be turned into laughter. The schedule, however, was brutal. Stages turned into studios, scripts into stand-up, and days into nights. His fame brought him crowns, but it also brought him chains, robbing him of sleep, family meals, and priceless time spent with his kids. He would later admit that he was well known worldwide, but not at home during the height of his sitcom success. In silent hotel rooms, when the thunderous applause subsided into a hush so thick it echoed in his ears, that truth haunted him. The tour that made him famous followed. Steve went on the Kings of Comedy tour with Bernie Mac, D.L. Hewley, and Cedric the Entertainer from 1997 to 2000. Arenas trembled with thunderous crowds night after night. Harvey's name was inscribed not only in the annals of stand-up comedy, but also in the very fabric of American society when Spike Lee encapsulated it all in the original Kings of Comedy, 2000. The sound of entire stadiums chanting his name was so beautiful that it was nearly intolerable to a man who once questioned whether the world would remember him. Even so, his body was warning him about fatigue, stress, and the silent cost of bearing a crown too heavy for too long, even as his heart grew with pride. "Every cheer reminded me of the nights I went without food," he thought. "I was reminded of the darkness I came from by every spotlight." However, occasionally, he said quietly, "It also reminded me of everything I missed while chasing it." But Steve's impact stretched far beyond the stage. Once stifled by a stutter, his words became healing tools. He put all of his hard-won knowledge into the 2009 book Act Like a Lady, Think Like a Man, which transformed scars into lessons and became a New York Times bestseller before being made into a successful movie. Act Like a Success 2014, Jump 2016, Straight Talk, No Chaser 2010, and others followed. Each one included survival maps for people who were still stuck where he was, in addition to advice. None of the accolades were able to take away the memory of that Ford, but they came in waves. Bet 2011 Humanitarian of the Year, a 2013 Hollywood Walk of Fame star, several Daytime Emmys, NAACP Image Awards. The street where he grew up was renamed Steve Harvey Way in 2015, a 2016 honorary degree. Every time he stood on stage to receive applause, he acknowledged that his thoughts returned to the evenings when he curled up by himself and muttered his father's advice. Read it again. Make a commitment. Steve Harvey's ascent was a resurrection rather than a simple ascent. From best-selling pages to broadcast empires, from Harlem to Hollywood, he became a living example of how faith can propel a person through adversity and how perseverance can transform mockery into acclaim. Even though he was crowned by the world, the man behind the smile was worn out from years of not getting enough sleep, the pain of missing birthdays, the empty seats at family dinners, and the burden of battles waged in silence. He had more than just success in his career. It was the realization of a prophecy written on a ripped piece of paper by a shaky child. Once ridiculed, a dream is now a part of legend. However, fate does not spare even legends. The fall is sharper at higher crowns. In December 2015, under the glittering stage of the Miss Universe pageant, the same spotlight that had once seemed like salvation to Steve Harvey became a burning blade. Triumph gave way to humiliation in a single fateful breath. He read the wrong name, crowning the wrong queen, while millions of viewers across continents held their breath. The theater went cold. Like thunder, gasps echoed. Every moment of panic was caught on camera. The man who had dedicated his life to controlling a microphone felt as though his voice had been stolen in front of the entire world in that very moment. The moment seemed to last forever, he later admitted, with each second reverberating like a lifetime of failure. Finally, with a trembling voice and a stripped-down dignity, he said, "I just want to apologize," choosing the truth over flight. It became one of the most excruciating public apologies in television history, yet also one of the bravest acts of accountability the world had ever witnessed. The fallout was brutal. Memes went viral. His suffering was transformed into jokes by late-night comics. His career was declared over by headlines. Carrying the weight of a billion jeering eyes, Harvey left the stage into a silence that was far colder than any crowd's roar. Later, he acknowledged that he questioned whether his life's work had been undone in 60 seconds during the lonesome hours that followed. But he refused to hide where others might have. He did the unthinkable. The very next year, he was back to host Miss Universe. It was no longer about the crown or the applause when he stepped back under those lights, scarred but unbroken. It was about taking back his voice and demonstrating that honor is determined by having the guts to stand up when others laugh at your failure, rather than by being flawless. However, fate had more in store for him. Darker blows that went far deeper than any joke were delivered behind the dazzling lights of international stages. His talk show Steve, which he had put his heart and soul into, fusing humor with humanity, laughter with life lessons, was canceled by NBC in 2019. It was a thunderclap of an announcement. He became aware of it nearly simultaneously with the general public, caught off guard by headlines that discussed endings rather than beginnings. Such a loss would seem to many like an eraser, as though years of work had been erased with a single choice. It was just another trial by fire for Harvey. He did not snap or mope when he stood in front of the same people who had witnessed his happiness and tears during the last recording. Rather, he said, "This is just a new chapter," his calm voice concealing the internal storm. "Even at 62, I still have pages left in this book." It wasn't a shield. It served as a compass, helping him and the millions of people watching to realize that sometimes the closing of one door is the first step toward the opening of a larger one. Smaller but still sharp, the bruises continued to appear. Jokes that provoked criticism. Uncommon words are making headlines. Harvey learned the danger of being unscripted, unfiltered and human in a time when every sound could be amplified and played back indefinitely. Every dispute sliced like a thin piece of paper. However, each healed into a scar that suggested self-control, modesty, and the weight of power wielded by a man who could influence millions with a single sentence. Hunger and homelessness were not like the suffering of these years. It was the sting of having one's dignity put to the test in front of others, not the pain of an empty stomach. Once curled up in the backseat of a car, the man was now curled up in the glare of memes, his mistakes being replayed on indestructible digital screens. However, he was not broken by humiliation. It made him more sophisticated. He transformed humiliation into strength, mockery into fortitude, and every taunt into motivation for a greater good. He later remarked, "God showed me I was just turning the page every time I thought I'd reach the end." By 2019, Steve Harvey had demonstrated something far more important than perfection, that the measure of success in life is not perfect steps, but rather the will to keep going. The man who had been broken by poverty and the boy who had been silenced by a stutter both had visible scars, but they were taller than ever. He demonstrated to the world that the real hallmark of a legend is not invincibility to failure, but rather the unwavering courage to get back up after laughter turned cruel and applause faded into silence. Success is said to require sacrifice, but for Steve Harvey, his family was the first thing he ever had to give up. He married Marcia, the quiet anchor who supported him when he was still a struggling young man with nothing but jokes in his pocket and a dream too fragile to hold. In 1981, just 24 years before Apollo or television fame, they had a son, Broderick Jr., and twin daughters, Carly and Brandy. For a while, the sound of laughter filled their home, not from crowds, but from the naive voices of kids who thought their father could do anything. However, the cupboards were frequently empty behind the laughter. The furniture was stacked lower than the bills, and instead of lifting them up, the dream started to drag him away. The 1980s were ruthless. Harvey was not yet well known. He was working odd jobs, making ends meet, and occasionally sleeping in his car when his finances ran low. Mornings at home were missed when spending nights under comedy lights. His clothes were shabby, his wallet was frequently empty, and their refrigerator was as empty as the hope Marcia clung to. She quietly carried the burden of motherhood, making the most of every dollar, feeding her ravenous kids and seeing her husband vanish into clubs that hardly ever made enough money to pay the rent. Later, Steve would admit in a sorrowful voice, "I lost my family chasing the dream." As his ambition increased, the marriage fell apart. Missed birthdays, cold dinners, and the empty chair where a father should have sat were the metrics used to measure the distance between them rather than miles. Silent resentment grew out of Marcia's loneliness. Despite being married, she was raising her 3 kids largely by herself. Broderick Jr. sought a father figure who was too frequently chasing laughter in distant rooms, and the twins frequently questioned why their father wasn't home. Steve was almost completely broken by the time the divorce was finalized in 1994. He carried the emotional burden of children who no longer witnessed him tucking them in at night. He had to start over from virtually nothing in terms of money. Even in his own home, the man who could make strangers laugh uncontrollably was unable to stop the tears. Marcia's trust had been damaged by the marriage. The children had lost years of their father's presence as a result. The pain of losing that first family never fully went away. Nevertheless, the seeds of resilience grew even during this most difficult period in my life. Steve would never forget the truth that he was etched with by the anguish of failing as a husband and father. Every laugh he got and every stage he walked on had a price. And Marcia and the kids he loved but lost in the name of pursuing a dream were the first and most significant cost to Steve Harvey. Steve Harvey was on the verge of realizing all of his dreams by the mid-1990s, his TV face. His reputation in comedy is growing, his future coming to pass. However, beneath the radiance of his success, he bore the scars of his first failed marriage and the pain of 3 children he rarely saw. His private life felt silent for 2 years. Hotel hallways, airport lounges, and empty dinner tables. When his life felt like a blur of scripts and spotlights, he found solace and company in Mary Shackelford, whom he met in that loneliness. She appeared to Steve as a second chance, an opportunity to put the broken pieces back together. In the hope that things would turn out differently, he married her in 1996 when he was 39 years old. The formative years were like a salve for old wounds. The laughter that filled their home came from a family discovering its rhythm, not from strangers in arenas. When their son Winton was born in 1997, it was like sunlight peeping through storm clouds. Harvey loved the boy so much that he referred to him as my compass, the reason I kept standing. Simple pleasures characterized the evenings. Mary grinned close by as Steve stretched out on the living room carpet, allowing Winton to crawl across his chest. Weekends meant backyard cookouts, infant laughter mingling with the odor of charcoal, and snatched photos of a man who finally appeared happy. The sound of a baby laughing in his own house was evidence that redemption was possible for a man who had once lived out of a car and kept his entire world in the trunk. With Mary's hand resting softly on Winton's shoulder and Steve holding him high above his head, each smile in those family portraits conveyed a tale of hope being restored. At last, stability seemed within reach. Harvey gave himself permission to think that he had escaped the specters of loss, loneliness, and poverty during those brief years, and that maybe this time, love would endure. However, storms tend to reappear, sometimes with more intensity. However, ambition has 2 sides. Harvey's marriage started to falter due to the same absences that had caused the first to fall apart as his career took off. Sitcom tapings, Apollo, the Kings of Comedy tours. For nights when her husband wasn't taken away by the microphone, for dinners that didn't end with him packing a suitcase, Mary yearned for stability. Steve was obsessed with success and survival because he was afraid of falling back into poverty. What started out as brief silences, unanswered calls, and vacant seats during the holidays turned into arguments that were so abrasive that they sliced through the very love that had bound them together. After almost 10 years, the collapse was unavoidable by 2005. Additionally, this ending was captured on camera, unlike the silent heartbreak of his first marriage. Mary made accusations in front of the world that severely damaged Harvey's reputation and made him appear unworthy of the very reputation he had worked so hard to establish. The public's verdict was harsh, even though courts would later reject many of the claims. Once used as a laughing face on billboards, his image now appears in tabloids as a sign of scandal. He later acknowledged that my image and spirit were most severely damaged by that divorce. The fighting never stopped. Affidavits took the place of scripts, Depositions took the place of laughter, and the icy monotone of court testimony took the place of punchlines. His character was questioned during interviews that ought to have honored his craft. At one point, he was afraid of being invisible. He was now scrutinized, overexposed, and held accountable for both imagined and actual errors. It felt like a wound reopening every time a paparazzi bulb flashed. Every rumor is a decision that cannot be challenged. The headlines, however, did not reveal the most profound wound. At home, it was the fracture. When Winton's parents' love turned to resentment, he was just 8 years old. Steve had little time left after the divorce because the boy lived with his mother. A holiday there, a weekend here, Harvey later admitted, I could survive the tabloids. However, I was devastated to see the anguish in my boy's eyes. Admired by millions, he was unable to protect the one child who mattered most and frequently sat alone in hotel rooms, staring at the ceiling. Harvey would refer to Winton's decision to live with him as a teenager years later as a second chance from God. Evidence that some relationships can endure adversity. In retrospect, Harvey characterized those years as a furnace of private suffering and public humiliation, rather than a divorce. He thought bitterly, I thought I had already lost everything once. I had no idea that I could lose even more. The man, who had gone from homelessness to household fame, felt deprived once more, not of material belongings, but of peace, dignity, and the basic comforts of family. Nevertheless, he persevered. He held fast to his faith, his fatherhood, and the unwavering conviction that wounds could be transformed into strengths. Mary Shackelford and I were more than just a married couple. He almost drowned because of the storm. The trial that showed the real price of following one's dreams. He was exhausted, scarred, and humbled as a result. Nevertheless, he remained upright. And in standing, he found something that even legends need to know. The most intense conflicts are fought in silence rather than in front of the public. When the crowd has dispersed and the only thing left to observe is your own reflection, it appears as if the fire of one storm has just begun to fade before another one breaks out. This time, the goal was Steve Harvey's survival rather than his marriage. Harvey stood in the ashes of his second divorce in 2005, looking into the future rather than as a television titan. He went to the bank, inserted his card, and watched the screen flash back a tiny number that made fun of him after the court battles were over and the attorneys were paid. $700. That figure struck a deeper chord for a man whose voice filled arenas and whose face filled billboards than poverty ever had. He later acknowledged that it was degrading to have everyone think you're wealthy when you're barely able to breathe. However, humiliation was just the start. The worst blow soon followed. The heartbreaking revelation that his taxes had been unfiled for 7 years due to a catastrophic accounting error. Penalties, interest, and principal. They swelled into a mountain so tall that it threatened to crush him, multiplying like vultures circling. Homelessness had once been a fear of his. He now feared something more sinister: incarceration, shame, and the destruction of all he had worked so hard to achieve. Two thoughts haunted him as he lay in hotel rooms at night, staring at the ceiling. What happens if I lose everything? What if my kids witness my fall? Nevertheless, Harvey did what survivors do in that abyss. He struggled. He devised a strategy as unrelenting as hunger itself. He was already in a studio, his voice echoing over the airways on a morning radio show long before sunrise when the city was still asleep. Even though debt threatened to silence him, that microphone became his lifeline and the one arena in which he felt powerful. Back then, every joke I told was paid for in fear, he recalled. Fear, however, kept me going. His armor was discipline. Each dollar served as a soldier. Every gig is a step closer to overcoming despair. His daily companion was exhaustion. He labored until his body stumbled. Stages at night, meetings during the day, and radio in the morning. No pause, no luxury. Refusing to let the avalanche bury him, he piled opportunities on top of exhaustion. His books emerged from that grind. Think Like a Man, Act Like a Lady in 2009. 2010's Straight Talk, No Chaser. Every page he wrote served as a brick wall keeping creditors at bay, in addition to offering guidance to others. Then in 2010, fate took a turn. As the host of Family Feud, Harvey took the stage. Ratings skyrocketed to all-time highs in just 3 years. What started out as a lifeline turned into a resurrection. The man who used to curl up in a Ford now made an appearance every night in American living rooms. But this time, he was the face of laughter, rather than a victim of debt. It was a brutal climb, though. Harvey acknowledged that for years the IRS received every paycheck directly. After standing ovations, there were nights spent praying using calculators and worrying that he might still be erased by the shadow of debt. "I thought I was done," he said. However, God wasn't finished with me. He clawed his way out slowly, painfully, performance by performance, dollar by dollar. Proof that perseverance could transform shame into testimony overshadowed the murmurs of humiliation. "You're done." Harvey had rebuilt more than just money by the late 2000s. He restored honor. He restored order. He restored the faith that had sustained him since childhood. It was never just numbers in the 1,907 years of taxes chapter. It was about survival, shame, and the fear of failing his kids. However, it was also about what comes next. He prayed on his knees. He fought from his knees. And he carried scars with him when he got up that were more powerful than any joke. That the weight of ruin can be transformed into the very basis of redemption through faith, self-control, and an unwavering will. Steve Harvey was performing on stages that millions of people coveted by the middle of the 2000s. Off stage, however, he bore scars that no spotlight could cure. 2 failed unions, kids who had seen him leave, debt-filled nights that almost broke him, and the emptiness of a man who could make the entire world laugh while crying in private. His breathing had been sustained by survival. However, living is not the same as surviving. Harvey would later refer to Marjorie Bridges as the best thing that ever happened to him. Their tale seemed to have been predetermined by fate. He had said, "I don't know who you are, but I'm going to marry you one day," while pointing to her in the crowd while looking down from a stage in Memphis years before. At that time, life tore them apart, but fate was patient. When fate reunited them in 2005, Harvey was nearly broken in spirit and bruised by scandal. He married her 2 years later at the age of 50, exhausted, scarred, but still full of hope. And with that promise, he found redemption in addition to a wife. What television, money, and fame couldn't do, Marjorie did. She supported him. She brought calm where he had been frantic. She made him whole where he felt broken. She whispered prayers over him when he doubted himself, reminded him to eat when his body ached from working through the night, and urged him to sleep when he would have worked through the night. Harvey has acknowledged that 85% of my things happened after we were married. He wasn't discussing money. He was discussing peace, the precious gift of returning home to laughter around the dinner table rather than silence. They created something greater than themselves together. 7 members of a blended family. Living together are Steve's 3 kids, Marjorie's 3, and their youngest, Winton. There were initial hesitancies due to the step's inherent distance. Harvey, however, resisted letting that term characterize them. He gave his last name to her children. They gradually came to trust him because of his love and consistency. He discovered how to be there for them consistently, rather than with extravagant displays. Quiet conversations before bed and car rides to school. Dinners in which he spoke less and listened more. He became their father and protector, in addition to being their provider. During a televised tribute in 2015, the world witnessed that bond. "You gave me your last name," said Jason, Marjorie's son, turning to face Steve. "You are the best dad." The auditorium fell silent. Harvey's face was captured on camera as he broke down and started crying. Not as a comedian or host, but as a man who had finally been forgiven. For someone who once muttered, "I lost my first family chasing the dream," those were not merely words of love. They were healing, forgiveness, and grace manifested. What no crown of fame could ever give Harvey was life with Marjorie. The silent wonders of inclusion. His family was waiting at the table in the evenings when he returned home. Birthdays on which all adopted and biological children stood together as one. Vacations where he was just a dad and not Steve Harvey, the celebrity. He frequently claims that Marjorie saved his life. However, this might be the more profound reality. He was worth saving, she reminded him. Harvey maintains that nothing compares to what he discovered in her, even as he looks around at the mansions, the honors, and the television programs that bear his name today. The man who used to sleep in a car and worry that he had lost all the families he could ever have is now sitting at a table with kids who support him. Marjorie transformed his scars into tales of recovery, his regrets into lessons, and his house into a home. Marjorie's marriage to Steve Harvey was more than just a new chapter in his life. The chapter was it. The instant joy turned into survival, when shame turned into grace. The quiet, everyday, miraculous truth of having it all, As revealed to a man who had almost lost everything, at almost 70, Steve Harvey is more than just a comedian and host. He is the creator of a multinational corporation. His career spans generations of fans, industries, and continents. Family Feud, which is currently filmed at Tyler Perry Studios in Atlanta, has featured him as its face since 2010, making it one of the most watched daytime television programs. A new season of its ABC spin-off Celebrity Family Feud is already scheduled for 2025. Through podcasts and syndication, the Steve Harvey Morning Show reaches millions of people in the U.S. and abroad every morning from 6 to 10 a.m., and it has become a household and commute ritual. Harvey has far surpassed American television by licensing Family Feud to viewers in South Africa, Ghana, and soon Botswana, where he will host the 2025 edition of the show himself through his company, Steve Harvey Global. He also dabbles in entrepreneurship and health. Harvey has combined personal wellness with business innovation with Leva2, a line of greens and supplements he co-founded. The products in the line mirror his own disciplined approach to vitality and longevity. His vision, not just his visibility, is what makes him who he is today. In order to outlast any one stage, microphone, or contract, Harvey has created a diverse empire: publishing, production, international formats, radio, television, and business. Each branch serves as a platform and a safety net, demonstrating a philosophy he frequently espouses. When you can produce multiple streams, you should never rely on just one. He is now motivated by foresight rather than fear, the ability to transform past wounds into strategy, and that strategy into a legacy that endures long after the spotlight has faded. The external representations of Harvey's reconstructed life shine with the size of an empire. In 2020, he acquired a 17-acre property that had belonged to Tyler Perry, one of Atlanta's crown jewels. With a modern gym, spa, infinity pool, home theater, and even a secret ballroom tucked away underground, the nearly 35,000-square-foot mansion reads like a private resort, a gathering place in secret. According to media reports and public records, it is worth about $15 million, but what it stands for is what really makes it valuable. After decades of impermanence, permanence. This estate is merely the most recent development in a way of life that is always evolving. Harvey lived above the skyline in a penthouse in the Trump Tower during his time as a Chicago talk show host. At his feet, the city lights up. He later rented a mansion in ultra-exclusive Beverly Park for 6 figures a month. Evidence that Harvey's home had evolved from a place of refuge to a stage. His vacations have taken him far from home. He and his family have been pictured on super yachts which can cost hundreds of thousands of dollars a week to charter, escape moments earned after years of unrelenting work. In terms of horsepower and chrome, his garage also tells a tale. Marjorie received a Bentley and a 1941 Cadillac, also known as a Rolls-Royce Phantom 8, that were both immaculately preserved. Each one is more about testimony than transportation. Watches become punctuation marks of accomplishment on his wrist. The timeless authority of Rolex Day Date, the exuberance of Rainbow Daytona, and the miniature storytelling of Roger Dubois' Knights of the Round Table. Then there is the fashion. Harvey has revolutionized contemporary men's fashion for his age. Under the direction of stylist Ellie Caramo, his black and white outfits are frequently going viral. Sharp edges, bold hues, and expert tailoring. Every ensemble is a statement that reinvention is not time-bound. Today, a man's aesthetic is measured in confidence, a luxury far more scarce than stone or steel, whereas in the past it was measured in scarcity. But despite his wealth, Harvey is a man who lives in fear and discipline. His biggest struggle right now is with his own body, not with contracts or applause. He has been candid about his high blood pressure, sleep apnea, and the unsettling onset of Sjogren's symptoms, which used to make him look up at the ceiling with fear and wonder if grieving would be easy. He lost 30 pounds after 50, devoted himself to the daily grind of training, and developed a regimen of full-body strength and unrelenting cardio because he was determined not to let illness take away what hardship could not. He eats austere, clean meals. His supplements are derived from Levate-U, the brand he co-founded. Sleep discipline now rules nights that were once lost to chaos. Survival, not luxury. My promise to my audience and my family is health. Knowing that the same grit that restored his fortune must now protect his flesh, he insists there are still shadows. The silent ritual of blood pressure checks, handcuffs, and meticulously planned routines is hidden behind the spotlessly tailored suits. The memory of exhaustion that once interrupted him in the middle of a conversation and made him face his limitations lies behind the glowing confidence. Additionally, the public struggle continues after the private one. The 2015 Miss Universe mistake became a meme that outlives its time after being repeatedly played online. He took responsibility for it, expressed regret, and went back. But every time his name is mentioned again, the sting of embarrassment flares up. The ghost of scarcity is even more profound. Harvey acknowledges that the fear has persisted despite being surrounded by acres of Atlanta estate and chandeliers that illuminate secret ballrooms with golden light. I still consider $100. He admits that the number is now more related to memory than money. The ongoing reminder of the vulnerability of security. The air is still filled with applause, but the silence of responsibility is the loudest sound when the curtains close. The burden of an empire to run, of 7 kids and grandkids who look up to him as their father, and of the assurance that discipline, not celebrity, will protect them. This period of Steve Harvey's life, however, is not quantified by wealth, contracts, or even ratings. It is quantified in terms of healing. Harvey has transformed regrets into wisdom and scars into strength with Marguerite by his side, the woman he refers to as the best thing that ever happened to him. They created a blended family together, demonstrating that love is a choice, bonded by dedication rather than blood. "You gave me your last name," his stepson Jason said, looking him in the eye on live television in 2015. "You are the best, Dad," Harvey cried uncontrollably. For a man who once muttered, "I lost my first family chasing the dream," there was no applause at that time. It was atonement. It demonstrated that love can be used to rewrite even damaged chapters. According to public estimates, his net worth is currently in the 9-figure range. His house, a 17-acre mansion in Atlanta. Harvey, however, maintains that the true treasure is much more modest. Meals at which all adopted and biological children eat at the same table. There are evenings when he is just his father and not Steve Harvey, the icon. Grandchildren running through the halls in the morning are far more precious than any trophy case. His life now speaks louder than jokes. It is a testimony shaped by grace and adversity. That fortitude can withstand mockery. A man can endure fire because of that faith. And even the most severe wounds can be healed by that love. Hard-won, unmerited, and unconditional. Once doubting his voice, the boy now uses it to remind the world to hope and to make it laugh. It's often best expressed by Harvey himself. Trophies collect dust and applause wanes, but the things that last are discipline, family, and thankfulness. Let me ask you this. Have you ever experienced a sense of rebirth in your life, when you were given another chance by grace or love? Please share your thoughts below if Steve Harvey's story has ever moved you, until you decide to write it with love. Your words might serve as the reminder to someone else that healing is possible, that no scar is permanent, and that the story is never truly over.